It was a crisp Tuesday morning, the kind where the air still holds a trace of dew, and the birds sing like they haven't been warned yet that trouble's coming. I was halfway through my second cup of black coffee, staring out the window at the sycamore tree I planted with my late wife 30 years ago when I heard it. 3 knocks. Not a neighborly tap-tap, not a package drop-off thud. No, this was sharp forceful, like someone was announcing themselves with more authority than they had. I set my mug down slowly. Old instincts from my time in the army never really left. My spine straightened, my breath grew quiet, and I moved toward the door with silent purpose. I hadn't had reason to expect confrontation in years, but something about those knocks, it woke something up in me. When I opened the door, a man in his 40s stood there. He wore a tactical-style vest with HOA enforcement officer printed in cheap Velcro lettering across the chest. On his hip was what looked like a holstered Glock. His posture was stiff, like he had practiced this in the mirror and liked what he saw. In his hand, a crumpled set of papers he called a notice of emergency eviction. "You've failed to comply with the recent code enforcement directive," he said without greeting. "This property is in violation. I'm giving you 24 hours to vacate." I blinked. "Excuse me," he didn't flinch. "Your property lot 147 has been redistricted for communal landscape realignment. Under the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association's emergency policy, you've been reassigned to transitional housing in compliance with sustainability ordinances." Transitional housing, I repeated, feeling the heat rising in my chest. "This is my land. I've owned it for 35 years. My name's on the deed." "Your non-compliance is noted," he said as if reading from a script. "This notice was posted last week." I scanned the area around my doorframe. Nothing. "There was no notice," I said. "And even if there had been, you don't have the legal authority to evict anyone at gunpoint." He glanced toward his hip hand, twitching slightly. "This is standard enforcement gear." "No, it's intimidation," I said, squaring my stance. "You're not law enforcement, and I'm not moving." He stepped closer, the toe of his boot resting on the first board of my front porch. "You're resisting a direct HOA compliance action," he said low, almost growling. "I can have you removed by force." I narrowed my eyes. "You so much as touch your weapon, and you won't be the one making the next call." He stared at me for a long second. The kind of stare you get from a man who's trying to decide whether his fake authority is enough to overcome his real fear. I didn't blink. I've faced down worse in the Middle East. Eventually, he stepped back and shoved the crumpled notice into the screen door. "You've been warned," he spat before turning on his heel and storming off like some budget action movie villain. I closed the door gently, but my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from rage. The kind that simmers hot and quiet beneath the skin. I hadn't felt that kind of anger since the funeral, since I watched my wife lowered into the earth and the world didn't stop turning. I picked up the paper and read it. It was a mishmash of poorly worded legal jargon riddled with typos and unverified codes. No court stamp, no city seal, no legal weight. I grabbed my phone and started recording. I stood on my front porch and panned the camera down the street. That man was still visible, strutting away, clipboard in hand, like he had conquered something. "This is Jack Mercer," I said into the phone. "Resident of 1847 Winding Pine Drive, Maple Haven. Today, June 4th, 9:04 a.m. I was threatened at gunpoint by an individual identifying himself as an Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association enforcement officer. He delivered an invalid eviction notice citing non-existent code violations. I am documenting this event for the record. I posted the video privately for now, but I wasn't done. I pulled out the property deed from my office drawer. Everything was in order, owned free and clear. My wife and I had built this house from scratch after my final deployment. Every floorboard, every brick, it had our fingerprints on it. This wasn't just a house. It was legacy. The Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association had always been a nuisance. Petty fines for mailbox height threats about the color of my garden shed letters demanding I consider the aesthetic flow when I planted tomatoes in the front yard. But this was a line crossed. Later that afternoon, I walked the perimeter of my lot, checking my security cameras. I had footage of the man approaching, brandishing his weapon holster, issuing threats. The footage was clean time-stamped and saved. In 3 places. Still, my breath wouldn't settle. I stood in my garage for a long time looking at the boxes I'd packed away after retirement. Military service medals, my discharge papers, a photo of my son in his first year as a U.S. Marshal grinning in his uniform beside the U.S. District Court. He was due back tomorrow. Said he needed a break from all the cases out west and wanted to visit his old man. Well, he'd be walking into a hornet's nest. And for the first time in a decade, I wasn't sure I could handle it alone. The next morning, I didn't wake up to birdsong. I woke up to the mechanical crunch of tires on gravel, unmistakably slow, deliberate. I pulled back the curtain and saw a black SUV tinted windows parking directly in front of my driveway. He was back. Same tactical vest, same smug posture, but this time, he wasn't alone. Another man in a similar outfit flanked him. Neither wore any official law enforcement insignia, just the makeshift HOA compliance patches stuck to their chest and sleeves. It would have been laughable if it weren't for the handguns on both of their hips. I stepped onto the porch before they reached the steps. "You're trespassing," I said, voice calm but laced with steel. The one from yesterday, Evan Braxton, ignored my words and read from his clipboard. "Mr. Mercer, we've returned to enforce the 24-hour compliance order. Your failure to vacate is considered obstruction. We are now escalating this to physical removal." The second man reached for something clipped to his belt. I raised my voice. "You take one step closer, and I'm calling the real police." He scoffed. "Sir, you've already been notified. Law enforcement jurisdiction within HOA-managed land is superseded by internal enforcement procedures. It's in the bylaws." "That is not how any of this works," I snapped. "And you know it." Then he did it. Evan Braxton, he took a step onto my porch, unclipped his holster, and laid his hand directly on the grip of his handgun. Something inside me shifted. A cold clarity washed over me. "Get your hand off that weapon," I said. "Or what?" He sneered. I heard a voice from behind me, firm, unmistakably authoritative. "Or you're going to find yourself explaining this stunt to the U.S. Marshal Service." I turned. My son was standing in the doorway, duffel bag still slung over one shoulder. He was wearing jeans and a plain black t-shirt, but the badge on his belt and the Sig Sauer holstered at his side made everything else irrelevant. The 2 men on the porch froze. My son, Luke Mercer, calm as a lake in winter, stepped forward. "My name is Deputy Marshal Luke Mercer. I've just witnessed an armed threat against a civilian in his own home by individuals impersonating law enforcement. You have 5 seconds to disarm and step back before I detain you both." The man with his hand on the gun hesitated, flicked his eyes toward the second guy, then slowly raised his hands and stepped off the porch. "I'd like to see your credentials," he said, puffing his chest like he still had power. Luke pulled out his badge wallet and flipped it open, revealing his full credentials. The gold shone in the morning light. The air shifted. The show was over and they knew it. "I suggest you leave," Luke said. "Now, before we turn this into a federal incident." They backed off. Not a word of apology, not even a threat. Just shame wrapped in silence as they trudged back to the SUV and drove off without another look. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Luke turned to me. "You all right?" I nodded. "Yeah, now I am." We went inside. I poured him coffee and recounted everything. The false eviction notice, the threats, the fake badges. Luke listened, jaw tightening with every word. "They're escalating," he said. "This isn't just a rogue HOA officer. This is organized. Someone gave them those uniforms. Someone gave them a script." He pulled out his laptop from his duffel bag. Within minutes, he was checking registries databases, pulling up county maps, deed transfers, and code enforcement records. "That eviction notice they gave you," he said, tapping the screen. "This isn't filed anywhere. There's no legal motion. No city backing, nothing. It's paper fiction." I sat down beside him and looked at the map he had pulled up. My property sat on the edge of the development, bordering a wooded section the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association had long tried to claim as a future greenbelt zone. But my plot lot 147 wasn't under their jurisdiction. It never had been. They've been redrawing boundary lines, Luke said. Informally, quietly, and forcing out residents who don't comply. But they messed with the wrong house. He turned to me. Dad, do you want to go after them legally? I looked at the wall beside me, my wife's photo still framed above the fireplace. The porch she loved, the swing I built for her still creaking in the breeze outside. Yes, I said. I'm done being quiet. That afternoon, we walked the perimeter of the property, again this time, together. Luke showed me how to secure the camera feeds, how to back up the footage to encrypted cloud storage. We documented the tire marks in the gravel, the time-stamped footage of both men approaching with visible firearms. We contacted an attorney, a former JAG officer Luke trusted from a previous case. By the evening, I had filed formal complaints with the city zoning department, the local sheriff, and the state attorney general's office. We even notified a small independent news outlet that had previously covered HOA overreach stories. Luke made sure we left a paper trail thicker than a phone book. Still, I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I was scared, but because I knew this wasn't over. I stood at the window at 2 a.m., watching the moonlight spill across my yard, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about the people like me who didn't have a U.S. Marshal for a son. About those who were pushed out quietly with no one to stand on their porch and say no. This wasn't about boundaries or landscaping or bylaws. This was about power, and what happens when those who have none refuse to back down. The following morning, I awoke not to pounding fists or threats, but to the sound of bacon sizzling and the smell of fresh coffee. For a moment, it almost felt like years had been peeled away back to a time when mornings meant family, not conflict. Luke was already in the kitchen flipping pancakes with a confidence that could only come from years of eating MREs and deciding that anything civilian was gourmet. You're cooking, I asked, stepping in with a half smile. Figured I'd earn my stay, he said. Also figured you could use something normal this morning. I sat at the table and he poured me a cup of coffee, black just how I'd taught him. It was such a simple moment, but it anchored me. After everything that had happened, I needed that reminder I wasn't alone. We ate mostly in silence, not the awkward kind, but the kind that belongs between people who've been through hell and know that words don't always help. Sometimes presence is enough. After breakfast, we got to work. Luke had brought a portable scanner, a tablet, even a tiny printer. The key here is documentation, he said. They've built their empire on silence. On folks not knowing what's legal and what's not. That ends now. We started with the eviction notice. He scanned it, circled the invalid legal citations, highlighted the absence of signature stamps or court dates. It was clearly a bluff, a fabricated document dressed in official language. Next, we moved to the deed. Look at this, Luke said, pointing to the property map I'd kept in a safe deposit box since my wife passed. Your land extends 20 feet further east than what's shown on the public zoning map. They've literally shaved off part of your lot in their digital copy. Is that legal, I asked? It's fraud, Luke said, and I can prove it. He pulled up the city's property database. Someone at the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association had submitted a rezoning application 6 months ago, attempting to annex parts of several edge properties into a new community corridor enhancement zone. It had been approved barely, but without notifying the affected homeowners. And guess what he added, tapping furiously? They filed your parcel as abandoned. That's how they justified the eviction. Abandoned, I've lived here the entire time. They see me mow the damn lawn. Yeah, Luke said. But according to their filings, you haven't attended any HOA meetings in 2 years, and that in their twisted policy structure is considered non-participation grounds for forfeiture. I felt my jaw tighten. So because I didn't show up to listen to them argue about hedge height and mailbox colors, they think they can take my house. They don't think they can, Luke said. They already tried. The more we dug, the deeper it got. 3 other properties had been flagged the same way. 2 had already been demolished, cleared for community beautification projects. The 3rd had been converted into a dog park. I remembered that one. The family moved away suddenly last fall. No one asked why. By noon, we had compiled a full dossier of evidence, fake eviction notices, edited maps, fraudulent zoning changes, and videos of armed men impersonating officers. This isn't just a legal problem, Luke said. It's a systemic abuse. But we need to make it personal if we want to wake people up. He was right. Most people didn't care until it was their door being knocked on, their porch being stepped on, their home being invaded. That evening, we drafted an open letter meant for the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association Board, but also for the residents. It began with, "My name is Jack Mercer. I have lived in this neighborhood for 35 years. I serve my country, with honor paid every bill and mowed every blade of grass on this property. Last week, I was threatened at gunpoint by a man pretending to be law enforcement, delivering a fake eviction notice under the authority of a corrupt HOA. We didn't hold back. We named the men. We attached the evidence. We sent it to every resident on the HOA's mailing list and CC'd the local news. We printed 300 copies and walked them door to door. Some slammed their doors in our faces. Others accepted the letter with trembling hands. Most looked surprised, confused even like they hadn't known this kind of thing was happening in their own backyard. Mr. Robert Keating, a retired librarian, took the letter, read it quietly, and said I thought it was just me. I paid a $900 fine last year for repainting my shutters. Rhonda Carter, a woman down the block, said her grandmother had lost her garden after an HOA inspector deemed the tomato trellises hazardous structures. They made her cry, she said. She moved into assisted living last month. Each story was like a thread unraveling the sweater. And as we pulled, more residents began stepping forward. Quietly, carefully. But they stepped forward. That night, we received an email from an anonymous account they're watching. Be careful who you trust. The board has connections at city zoning. Luke read it and didn't flinch. That's a good sign, he said. They're scared. What now, I asked. Now, he said. Now we take it one step further. You ready for a fight? I looked around at the home I'd built. At the porch light, my wife insisted on keeping yellow. At the creak in the step, I never fixed because it reminded me of her humming as she came home from teaching. I've never been more ready. And I meant it. This wasn't just about standing my ground anymore. This was about making sure no one else got bulldozed under the banner of community improvement. It was time they learned that justice doesn't wear a patch that says HOA. It wears a badge with real authority and a family willing to fight back. 2 days later, the tension in our neighborhood could have been cut with a knife. Ever since the letters went out, the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association had gone quiet. No patrols, no notices. Not even their usual minivan creeping around photographing mailboxes and driveway oil stains. It was the silence before a storm, the kind you learn to fear more than the noise itself. Then right around lunchtime, the storm arrived. Luke and I were sitting on the porch, not talking much, when we saw them 2 black sedans and a glossy blue Ford Explorer with city insignia barely visible on the doors. They parked diagonally across my front yard, deliberately blocking the driveway. Out stepped Evan Braxton, the one who'd drawn his weapon. He was no longer in a patched-up HOA vest. This time he wore what looked like a makeshift uniform, khaki shirt, gold buttons, and a badge clipped to his chest that looked suspiciously laminated. He wasn't alone. Behind him were 2 more so-called enforcement agents, taller, younger, more aggressive in posture, and a woman in a navy suit holding a clipboard. Her presence gave the whole charade an air of false legitimacy, but Luke knew better. Watch their hands, he muttered. We both stood. I kept my hands visible. Luke casually unclipped the badge on his belt, letting it rest in plain sight on his hip. Jack Mercer, the woman asked, stepping forward. I am. I'm Carrie Dobbs, External Compliance Officer for Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association. You've been served a final citation of removal. We are here to conduct a property inspection and escort you off premises. Under what authority? Luke said, stepping forward. She faltered when she saw his badge. And you are Deputy U.S. Marshal Luke Mercer. You are attempting to execute a forced removal without a court order, without law enforcement support, and without legitimate jurisdiction. That makes this not just unlawful, but a federal offense if carried out with threat or coercion. Carrie turned slightly toward Evan Braxton, whose mouth tightened into a smirk. "We have documentation," he said. "Our legal team cleared this. This land was rezoned under Title IX HOA ordinance for non-compliant structures." Luke didn't even blink. That ordinance applies to shared communal lots and only within the active HOA perimeter. This property lot, 147, was never legally annexed into HOA jurisdiction. The board's digital remapping is fraud, and you know it. The woman's brow furrowed. Luke pulled out a folded map from his back pocket. "See this survey filed with the county clerk in 1998. This property lot, 147, was never legally annexed into HOA jurisdiction. The board's digital remapping is fraud, and you know it." Evan Braxton scoffed, stepping forward. "You think a badge gives you the right to interfere with community management?" Luke didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to, no. The law does. There was a long, icy silence. I could hear the wind rustling the leaves. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked, but no one moved. Then, like a detonator being pressed, Evan Braxton's hand drifted toward his side, toward that holstered gun again. Luke was faster. In one motion, he had his sidearm unholstered, lowered to his thigh, and his voice boomed. "Do not reach for that weapon." Everyone froze. Luke stepped forward, commanding the space with the certainty of someone who had trained for moments, just like this. "You are impersonating a law enforcement officer, carrying a weapon while issuing fraudulent civil orders and trespassing on private property. I have all of this on camera." He pointed to the corner of the roof where a high-definition security cam blinked silently. Carrie visibly panicked, stepping between Luke and Evan Braxton. "Let's de-escalate," no, Luke cut in. "This is done. Unless you want to be detained, you'll leave now and return with a court order, one I know you'll never get, because what you're doing is criminal." Evan Braxton hesitated just for a second. But in that second, I saw it, the recognition that he'd lost. The recognition that his posturing, his weapons, his fake power, all of it had hit a wall he couldn't push through. He turned, muttered something under his breath, and motioned to the others. They retreated, but not before Luke called out, "You may want to tell your board that their timeline just collapsed. I'll be delivering a formal cease and desist to your HOA president this evening and forwarding all of this to the U.S. Attorney's Office." Carrie looked like she wanted to disappear. The others didn't even make eye contact as they slid back into their vehicles. I exhaled slowly as the last sedan backed away. Luke holstered his weapon and looked at me. "That could have gone worse. You didn't even flinch," I said. "I've had worse standoffs in parking lots, outside bars." He shrugged. "But these people, they've built something dangerous. They've gotten too used to scaring folks who don't know better." We went back inside our steps, heavy. I sat on the couch, replaying everything in my head. "How do we stop them for good?" I asked. Luke sat down across from me, serious now. "We gather every homeowner they've threatened, every document they've forged. We file with state authorities, media, and prepare for litigation. Litigation. It's the only way to dissolve a corrupt HOA. You take away their legitimacy, you expose their fraud, and you force the city to intervene. But it has to be airtight. And that cease and desist, I deliver it tonight directly to their president." The idea of Luke walking into their office alone made me uneasy. But I knew better than to doubt him. That evening, he printed the letter, notarized the file, and pulled on a collared shirt. Before he left, I handed him something I hadn't worn in years, my army dog tags. "Why are you giving me these?" he asked. "Because that house is more than wood and walls," I said. "It's where I came home to your mom. It's where I raised you. And it's where I'll take my last breath if I have any say in it. So if anything happens, they'll know who I am." He nodded, once slipped the tags over his head, and walked into the night. I stood at the porch again, just like I had days before. But this time, I wasn't waiting for them to take something from me. I was waiting to take something back. The house felt hollow that night after Luke left. I sat in my recliner, fingers laced together, eyes fixed on the porch light he'd insisted I replace with a motion-activated one last year. He always thought ahead, always saw what could happen before it did. And now, for the first time in decades, I was glad someone else was watching over me. But I didn't just sit there. While Luke was delivering the cease and desist letter, I opened the dusty fireproof lockbox in my closet and pulled out every document I had on the house. Survey maps, warranty deeds, easement agreements, even our old building permit from 1990. I laid them out like puzzle pieces on the dining room table. And something odd jumped out. A small footnote on the original land plat from the city indicated that Lot 147, my lot, had been flagged in 2004 as environmentally protected green space. It was later corrected in red ink by a clerk and reclassified as a private residence. But what if someone had used that clerical error to justify an illegal rezoning effort? I scanned the files, photographed everything, and sent them to Luke via encrypted drive. Within minutes, he replied, "Bingo, that's the loophole they're abusing." The Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association wasn't just acting on personal vendettas or random whims. They were mining old records for ambiguities and exploiting outdated codes to annex properties. And I wasn't the first. Over the next 2 days, Luke and I held quiet meetings with a growing number of neighbors. We didn't use email. We didn't post on social media. We met in garages, in backyards, in the small community center library where no HOA board member ever bothered to show up. We listened. Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Ellen Keating, in their 70s, had been fined $3,000 for repainting their home with non-approved hues despite providing HOA-approved swatches. Tina Alvarez, a single mother of two, had her shed torn down while she was at work. The HOA claimed it was an unauthorized structure, even though she had city approval. Jeff Lynn was charged monthly for landscaping services he never received, and when he questioned the fees, he received a violation for aggressive conduct. One after another, they came forward. Quiet voices with years of swallowed frustration, now finding courage in each other. Luke compiled every testimony. We built a timeline, mapped every property, affected and flagged each fraudulent rezoning. But it was the paper trail that made the case solid. From Tina's payment records to the Keating's color approval forms, everything pointed to a pattern not just mismanagement, but calculated abuse. HOA board members were profiting from compliance fees, funneled into shell vendors. The board president's cousin ran the landscaping company. Her brother-in-law managed HOA security. The dots were no longer just connected, they formed a noose. Luke scheduled a meeting with a legal contact in the state attorney general's office. In the meantime, he advised every homeowner to stop paying HOA dues until the internal investigation was complete. He helped them write legal justifications and printed exemption letters citing civil code protections. Then came the retaliation. HOA flyers appeared overnight, taped to mailboxes and front doors. They were printed in red ink, all caps. Warning: do not engage with unauthorized individuals spreading false information about HOA leadership. Legal action may be taken. Luke laughed when he saw them. They're scared, but not everyone saw it that way. The Keatings received a noise complaint after their grandkids played in the front yard. Tina Alvarez had her water temporarily shut off for system maintenance. Someone keyed my truck. It was all so juvenile, and yet also orchestrated. "I need you to be careful," Luke said one night, as we reviewed more documents. "I've been careful for 35 years, I said. That's how they got this far." I saw the look in his eyes, that same look he had before raids overseas, when he knew something could go sideways. "I'm not going anywhere," I added. "They're not running me out." He nodded, but I could tell he was preparing for the worst. The next morning, we received an anonymous envelope on the porch. No return address. Inside was a photograph, grainy but unmistakable. It was Luke and me standing in the garage sorting documents. The photo had been taken from a distance, likely across the street or through a zoom lens. On the back, in black ink, was a single sentence. "You think badges make you untouchable." Luke stared at it for a long time. Then he smiled, not from amusement, but from resolve. "Good," he said. "Now we know they're watching. That means they know what's coming." We turned the photo over to the sheriff's office, filed an official report, and flagged it for the state investigator already reviewing the HOA's books. Luke insisted on installing more cameras, motion-activated, heat-sensitive, with direct cloud upload. He also updated me on the legal front. The cease and desist had been delivered and was met with laughter from the board president. But the letter had already served its purpose. The HOA's official email, which had once been used to spam residents with trivial violations, had now been subpoenaed by the city. The investigation was officially underway. By the end of the week, Luke had compiled a 97-page document package, printed, tabbed, and indexed, ready for state review. It included video footage, forged documents, testimony transcripts, property lines, financial flows, and legal citations. They tried to evict you at gunpoint, he said. Now we're evicting them by law. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling something bigger was coming, like the storm hadn't quite reached its worst yet. And I was right. Because the next morning, Luke didn't come back from his jog. His phone was still tracking on the neighborhood trail, the one that curved behind the clubhouse. But he was nowhere to be found. The moment I realized Luke hadn't returned from his jog, everything around me blurred. The porch, the steaming coffee cup in my hand, even the sun climbing gently above the tree line, it all collapsed into the sound of a slow building alarm inside my chest. I grabbed his phone location from the shared tracker. It still pinged behind the HOA clubhouse on the jogging trail that looped through the woods. He'd taken that route dozens of times before on past visits. It was public access property. But now, something felt off. I shoved my feet into boots, grabbed my keys, and drove. I didn't even stop to grab my cane, the one I usually used for long walks. My legs burned with adrenaline as I parked near the community trailhead. I spotted his phone almost instantly abandoned near the bench under the covered pergola, face up, unlocked. That's when I noticed it scuffed gravel. Shoe prints in the soft dirt, multiple sets, some with deep heel impressions, a half-broken twig on the edge of the path. Nothing screamed violence, but nothing screamed accident either. I picked up his phone and started filming. This is Jack Mercer. My son, U.S. Marshal, Luke Mercer, is missing. Last seen 6:12 a.m. heading into this trail loop. His phone was found at this location. Evidence of multiple footsteps and signs of interference. I called the sheriff's department and reported a potential abduction. I didn't have time to wait for politeness or bureaucracy. I gave them Luke's credentials, the ongoing HOA investigation, and the threats we'd received. They arrived within 30 minutes. I watched as deputies walked the perimeter, took photos, and collected samples. But something in their eyes told me they weren't sure how to proceed. They weren't used to taking threats from HOAs seriously, at least not until now. While they worked, I sat in my truck, hands clenched, heart racing. I kept trying to silence the fear with logic. Luke's a trained federal agent. He knows how to de-escalate, how to avoid ambushes. But logic doesn't do much when your son's badge and your home are caught in the crosshairs of a corrupt system. Just after noon, I received a text from an encrypted number. It read, "He's safe, but you're not. Drop the case." There was no signature, no reply option, just a single warning meant to break me. It didn't. Instead, it set something alight inside me, something old and military, something sharp-edged and clear. They had my son, or they wanted me to believe they did. Either way, I was done playing defense. By 2 p.m., the sheriff's office had added Luke to the missing persons database. News crews picked up the story. By late afternoon, federal marshal missing amid HOA corruption probe. Neighbors who'd once been too afraid to speak began calling me. Some came to the house trembling, offering anything they knew. A teenager brought over a video he recorded that morning while skateboarding footage of a black pickup truck parked near the trail with a man in a gray polo standing outside, checking his watch. I knew that polo. I knew that watch. The same security chief, Evan Braxton, who drew on me days ago. But it wasn't just about who took Luke, it was about why. I opened the evidence binder we'd built, flipped to the financial flow charts. Luke had flagged one line we hadn't looked at deeply, a shell company called Rimrock Compliance Solutions, registered in a neighboring state. According to the paperwork, they handled compliance logistics for multiple HOA boards, but their listed address traced to an abandoned storefront. And then it clicked. This wasn't just about Evergreen Hills. Rimrock was a private enforcement network arming, training, and deploying faux cops to upscale neighborhoods under the guise of community protection. They operated in legal shadows with enough jargon and bureaucracy to seem legitimate until someone asked the right questions. Luke had asked the right questions. That night I received a knock on the door, not 3 sharp bangs like before. Just one followed by a pause. It was Luke. His clothes were torn, his hands scraped, but his eyes clear sharp were still his. "Long story," he said, collapsing into a chair. But I got out. I grabbed a towel water and sat beside him like I had when he was 12 and wrecked his bike. They grabbed me from behind, pushed me into a van. Blindfolded, but I counted turns, tracked direction. They didn't hurt me, just tried to scare me. Said Rimrock wasn't going to let their contracts fall apart because of one nosy federal badge. He pulled a small recorder from his pocket. They talked. I recorded everything. My son. Even in a van with his hands zip-tied, he was still building the case. We uploaded the audio to the cloud, sent copies to 3 different contacts in federal enforcement. Within hours, we had confirmation a joint task force would investigate Rimrock. Luke's testimony, combined with the mounting local complaints, had opened a federal window. But the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association Board, they weren't going down quietly. The next morning, residents awoke to signs all across the neighborhood. "Mercer family is under criminal investigation. Do not trust vigilante justice. HOA has the right to protect its community." They printed them on letterhead, posted them on mailboxes. They even taped one to my truck. Luke just smiled. Perfect. We took photos of every single sign. Called the sheriff's department again. This time a lieutenant showed up, not a deputy. "They're escalating," he said. "But they're sloppy now. That makes them vulnerable." We moved quickly. I gave a televised interview that afternoon, calm and measured. No accusations, just facts. I told the public about the fake eviction, the fake cops, the missing son, the secret recordings. I spoke slowly, deliberately, like a man who'd spent a lifetime trying to do right, only to be pushed too far. That night, we filed a class action suit. 37 residents signed. More joined by morning. It was war now. But we weren't hiding, and we weren't alone. The day after the lawsuit went public, the entire neighborhood felt different, like the illusion had shattered, and people were finally seeing the rot beneath the manicured lawns and regulation rose bushes. At sunrise, I walked out to get the paper, half expecting another threat taped to my door. Instead, I found something else entirely. A folded note, scrawled in nervous handwriting. "Mr. Mercer, thank you. I've been afraid to speak up for years. I didn't think anyone could stop them. If you need a witness, I'm ready." There was no name. Just a phone number. It was the first of many. By noon, we had over a dozen new testimonies. Homeowners, former board members, even a landscaper who admitted he was paid cash under the table by the HOA to fabricate maintenance violations for targeted properties. One retired man confessed he was offered a discount on his dues if he testified against his neighbor in a compliance hearing. The board had run Evergreen Hills like a fiefdom, but their subjects were finally turning. Luke and I met with several of them at our kitchen table, no lawyers yet, just neighbors sitting across from neighbors passing coffee mugs and recounting stories they'd buried for years. Rhonda Carter from Maple Court broke down in tears as she described how the HOA threatened to place a lien on her house unless she removed her late husband's veteran flag from the front yard. They called it excessive political expression. A father of 3 revealed that the HOA had fined him for unsupervised minors because his kids played tag on the sidewalk. He paid out of fear. "I couldn't risk them reporting me to child services," he said, eyes lowered. It was horrifying. And it was familiar. Each story mirrored our own, a mixture of coercion, manipulation, and fear disguised as neighborhood order. They hadn't just enforced rules, they'd weaponized them. We compiled the new testimonies, added them to the legal file, and reached out to the local news again. This time they sent a team. The story aired that evening. Residents revolt against rogue HOA federal marshal, war veteran lead, legal battle. I watched the segment in silence. They filmed me on the porch, the same porch where the first threat had come. Luke spoke on camera, too briefly, directly. His words were sharp and restrained, but there was fire beneath them. The public response was immediate. People from across the state began sending messages, stories of similar HOA abuse requests for help, offers of support. A local nonprofit that focused on property rights reached out to offer pro bono legal aid. A former judge offered to testify on HOA overreach in our case. But for every show of support, the board dug in deeper. The next HOA newsletter delivered by mail and slipped into every mailbox like some desperate last stand read, "We are under attack by individuals with a personal vendetta who seek to dismantle the values of our community. Stand with your board. Do not be deceived." Some residents still believe them. I saw it in their eyes when they crossed the street instead of waving, when they avoided my gaze at the grocery store. Fear was hard to shake, and manipulation doesn't unravel overnight. But I wasn't interested in being liked. I was interested in truth, and truth was closing in. 2 days later, the city council called an emergency meeting. Luke and I showed up early, binder in hand, documents stacked 2 inches thick. We weren't on the official agenda, but the moment the floor opened to public comment, I stood. My voice didn't shake. "My name is Jack Mercer," I said. "I've lived in Evergreen Hills since 1990. I'm a retired serviceman. I raised my son in that house. I buried my wife in that neighborhood. And 3 weeks ago, I was threatened at gunpoint by someone pretending to be a law enforcement officer under the authority of this HOA. I handed the city clerk the recording of Luke's abduction, the forged documents, the testimonies. I gave them the full picture. The council went silent. After I finished, a woman from the council leaned forward. "Are you seeking criminal charges?" "No," I said. "I'm seeking justice." By the end of the night, the council had voted unanimously to open an independent municipal review of Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association. They also issued a temporary suspension of all board enforcement powers pending the investigation. That alone sent a ripple through the neighborhood. No more fines, no more citations, no more midnight letters taped to doors. Just silence, and the sound of something collapsing behind the curtain. That weekend, we held a neighborhood meeting this time. In the open-air pavilion the HOA once reserved for approved events only. There were no permits, no board members, just over 60 people standing in a loose circle listening. Some cried. Some apologized for their silence, for their fear, for the things they wished they'd said sooner. We didn't lecture. We listened. Luke stood near the edge, his arms crossed, face unreadable. But I knew that look. It was the face of someone watching something bigger than revenge unfold, watching something heal. That night, as we locked up the house, I turned to him. "You think we've done enough?" He shook his head. "Not yet." I knew what he meant. The president of the HOA, Marla Sheffield, hadn't spoken publicly since the cease and desist. She was still holding meetings with her remaining loyalists behind closed doors. Rumors said she was planning to file a restraining order against me for harassment. But we had one more card to play. Luke had submitted a request to the county for full financial disclosure of HOA accounts under the Nonprofit Transparency Act. The board had 5 business days to respond, and the deadline was tomorrow. The deadline came and went with no reply from the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association. No email, no physical documents, no official response. What they didn't know, or didn't believe, was that Luke had already filed for a court-ordered disclosure the day before the deadline, and the judge had signed it that morning. By noon, an unmarked government vehicle rolled into Evergreen Hills, flanked by 2 city code enforcement officers and a representative from the state auditor's office. They didn't park near the clubhouse's visitor lot. They drove straight up the private lane, right to the front door of the HOA headquarters, a small but arrogantly designed building the board had converted from a former community pool facility. Marla Sheffield was inside, surrounded by 3 remaining board members. We didn't need to speculate. We knew because Luke and I stood quietly across the street watching from behind the hedges that used to shield my neighbor's roses. "They'll make it theatrical," Luke muttered. "People like her always do." And he was right. The moment the state officials entered the building, voices raised. Marla stormed out onto the steps minutes later, waving a sheaf of papers in one hand and shouting about overreach and illegal surveillance. She had the full meltdown, complete with tears, threats of lawsuits, and a dramatic refusal to hand over the HOA's accounting books. But it was too late for deflection. The agents already had a warrant. What they found inside shocked even us. Not only had Marla and her inner circle funneled tens of thousands of dollars from resident fines into administrative stipends for themselves, but they'd used HOA funds to pay for private security uniforms, firearms, training sessions, and even a line item labeled Compliance Vehicle Enhancement, which turned out to be the black SUV that had pulled into my driveway weeks ago. But the worst discovery came in the form of an email thread recovered from the HOA's central server. The subject line, Mercer Family Contingency Plan. It detailed strategies to discredit me and Luke, publicly fabricate code violations at my property, and coordinate anonymous complaints to federal agencies, questioning Luke's fitness as a marshal. It was damning, and it was premeditated. That evening, while most of the neighborhood was eating dinner or pretending not to know what was happening, Luke stood calmly as two uniformed officers walked Marla out in handcuffs. Her expression wasn't shocked, it was hollow. The kind of face someone wears when they realize the bluff didn't hold. That power borrowed from fear was never real. News crews descended within the hour. The arrest footage hit local TV and social media by nightfall, and the narrative shifted overnight. We were no longer the troublemakers. We were the whistleblowers. I woke the next morning to find bouquets of flowers on my porch. No notes, just silent gestures of apology and gratitude. A jar of homemade jam from Rhonda Carter down the block. A fresh pie with a sticky note taped to the top. We're sorry we didn't help sooner. Even Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Ellen Keating came by with their grandkids to say thank you. It wasn't redemption I was after, but I accepted their words all the same. Still, the damage ran deeper than most knew. Behind the scenes, Luke worked tirelessly with the U.S. Attorney's Office, compiling a federal case not just against Marla and her board, but against Rimrock Compliance Solutions, the shell company that had quietly supplied dozens of HOAs in the region with bogus compliance officers and pre-written legal scripts. That case would take months, maybe years, to unravel fully. But we'd lit the match. Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association was formally dissolved by emergency city vote 1 week later. In its place, a temporary neighborhood advisory board was created, made up of residents nominated by the community, not appointed behind closed doors. I declined nomination, but I suggested Tina Alvarez and Mr. Robert Keating. They accepted. The same day, the compliance vehicle was towed. The patches came off the fake vests. The mailbox where HOA notices were once dropped now stood empty. A plastic red flag raised as if in surrender. Luke and I walked the neighborhood that afternoon for the first time without looking over our shoulders. This place might still heal, he said quietly. I looked at him, a man forged by the law and hardened by war, yet still able to believe in something like community. It's worth trying, I replied. We passed the community pavilion, now stripped of the old brass plaque that had read HOA Board Members 2001 present. The spot looked cleaner somehow, lighter. Then Luke's phone rang. It was the regional office. They wanted him to come back early. Another case, I asked. No, he said. A commendation. Apparently exposing a rogue civilian enforcement scheme and dismantling a corrupt HOA puts you on someone's radar. I laughed. You deserve it. He looked at me. So do you. That evening, we sat on the porch just like we had the night after he came home. This time, no armed threats, no lawsuits hanging over our heads, just two men with tired hands and full hearts. You think this is over? I asked. He shook his head. Not yet. But it's starting to feel like justice, and that was enough, for now. The morning of the dissolution hearing felt different, quieter than usual, almost reverent. The air had that crispness I always associate with change, the kind that hums through a place when it's about to shed its skin. And Evergreen Hills, for all its rigid fences and manicured perfection, was finally about to do just that. I stood at the back of the city council chamber in my only suit, black, worn at the cuffs, a little tight in the shoulders, but still dignified. Beside me sat Tina Alvarez, her 2 boys dressed in button-ups and tucked quietly into the corners of her lap. Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Ellen Keating were front row clutching a yellow folder like it contained something holy. Behind us, the rest of the community, once fractured, now strangely unified. Luke wasn't there, not physically. He had flown out the night before for a federal briefing. But his presence was everywhere. In the court documents stacked on the council's desks in the USB drive labeled Evidence, Evergreen Hills, Homeowners Association Misconduct, and in the murmurs that filled the room when his name was mentioned. When the council chair finally spoke, it was with a weight that made everyone sit up straighter. We are here to vote on the immediate and permanent dissolution of the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association and to recognize the formal charges brought against its leadership for fraudulent financial practices, intimidation, and abuse of power. There was no drama, no shouting, no last-minute arguments, just a vote. 7 in favor, 0 opposed. The gavel came down like a thunderclap, definitive cleansing. And just like that, Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association ceased to exist. People didn't cheer. There was no applause. But there was something better relief. The kind of collective exhale that only comes when the grip around your throat finally loosens. Afterward, residents gathered outside in the sunlight. There were hugs, quiet tears, long postponed apologies. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years now laughed together under the same elm tree they once fought over for dropping too many leaves. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. I was halfway back to my truck when a woman stopped me. I recognized her face, though I couldn't recall her name. She wore a long cardigan and carried a small folder. "Mr. Mercer," she asked softly. "Yes, I never thanked you. I wanted to, but I was scared." I nodded. "You don't owe me anything." "I think we all do," she said, pressing the folder into my hands. "This is for my husband. He used to be on the board early on, before Marla took over. He tried to fight her once. She forced him out." The folder was thin, just a few old emails, financial records, and a typed statement signed 5 years ago. But it confirmed something we suspected all along, that Marla hadn't just manipulated the system. She'd rewritten it, intimidated those who questioned her, exiled the honest ones. Luke later added it to the federal case. I didn't stick around much longer that day. After weeks of battle, I was ready for quiet. At home, I stepped onto my porch and looked out across the yard. It looked the same as it always had, wild in places, stubborn in others, but now it felt like mine again. I took down the no trespassing sign I'd nailed up the night the fake HOA cops came. Left the nails in, though, a reminder the mailbox had already been replaced. The lock was new. The flag worked again. I spent the afternoon planting a new tree, something my wife always wanted, but we'd never gotten around to. A sugar maple right where the old garden used to be. It felt symbolic, something deep-rooted, wide-armed, offering shade for whoever came next. Later that evening, I sat with a letter Luke had left behind. "Dad, I've seen some tough places, corrupt courts, dirty mayors, even lawmen who sold their badges. But I've never seen someone stand taller than you did this month. You didn't just fight for a house, you fought for dignity. What you did here won't just protect this block. It'll echo in every neighborhood like ours. You reminded people that authority only works when we give it permission. I'm proud of you, Luke." I folded it carefully, slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket, and leaned back in the chair my wife used to rock in. For the first time in a long time, the wind felt like a friend again. The following week, I was asked to speak at a community forum about HOA reform. I declined. Not because I had nothing to say, but because it was time for others to speak now. Tina Alvarez spoke instead, and Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Ellen Keating. Even the teenager who filmed that grainy video near the trail stood up and told the story of what happened in Evergreen Hills. They didn't need a leader anymore, just a voice, and they'd found theirs. It's been 3 months since the HOA fell. You'd think that by now life would have gone back to normal, whatever that meant. But the truth is, there's no going back to the way things were. Not after everything we uncovered, not after what we all lived through together. And that's a good thing. Evergreen Hills feels different now. Not in the way that trees grow or roads crack with age, but in the way people greet each other. There's warmth where there used to be suspicion. Eye contact where there used to be avoidance. A quiet acknowledgement that none of us really knew how deep the rot ran until someone kicked at the foundation and made it all collapse. I still sit on the porch most mornings, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. Tina Alvarez passes by with her boys on their way to school. She waves. Now, and the youngest always points at the new sugar maple I planted and shouts, "That's Mr. Jack's tree, I guess that's something now." The new community advisory board is up and running. It's all volunteers, no salaries, no enforcers, no fake badges. Just regular folks trying to listen to each other and solve problems without resorting to threats or paperwork designed to intimidate. There are no more fines, no more patrols, no more fear in the form of envelopes taped to garage doors at midnight. What we have instead is a shared understanding we almost lost something precious, not just our homes, but the right to feel safe in them. And we're not going to let that happen again. Luke came back for a weekend last month. We didn't talk about the case much. He said the federal investigation into Rimrock compliance solutions is still ongoing. It's bigger than they thought. Dozens of neighborhoods, hundreds of homeowners, all linked through a tangled web of shell companies and forged documents. But what started in Evergreen Hills helped open the floodgates. Other communities are organizing now, asking questions, refusing to sign unchecked powers over to unregulated boards. Luke said it's like a quiet revolution, one block at a time. Before he left, we rebuilt the porch swing together, the one I made with his mother all those years ago. It had sagged with time, one chain half rusted, and the wood warped from too many seasons without care. We sanded it down, replaced the boards, tightened the bolts. When we finished, he sat in it with a satisfied grunt and looked out across the yard. You ever think he asked that a simple swing can outlast an entire corrupt institution? I laughed. Depends on who builds the swing. He left me his old badge. Said it was being replaced with a newer model lighter and embedded with some kind of tech that I didn't pretend to understand. This one's seen more than its fair share of battles, he said, but none prouder than the one fought here. I keep it in a shadow box above the fireplace, next to my service medals, and the photo of the three of us, Luke, my late wife, and me, standing in front of this house when he graduated from the academy. People still stop by. Some ask questions. Some just want to sit for a moment. One man, a stranger from 2 counties over, said, "I heard this was the porch where it started." I smiled, nodded, and handed him a glass of lemonade. Let them come. Let them listen. This porch has room for stories, for healing, for a second act. As for me, I still trim the hedges every Saturday. I plant what I want, where I want. I let the flag fly year-round. The city dropped the complaint that it was non-compliant decor after the board fell apart, and even if they hadn't, I wouldn't have taken it down again. It stands for something real now. A few nights ago, I walked the neighborhood under a full moon just like I used to. My steps were slower, but my chest felt light. I passed by the clubhouse, now repurposed into a community tutoring center. The old brass HOA plaque had been removed. In its place was a wooden sign carved by a local artist. It reads, "Evergreen Hills, built by neighbors, protected by courage." I stopped and ran my fingers over the letters. The grain was deep and warm, honest. I thought about the day they tried to take my house, about Evan Braxton with his hand on his gun, about the fake eviction, the fake documents, the fear they wrapped around real people like chains. And I thought about how all of it, every intimidation, every lie, was undone by one thing. Truth. Not shouted, not forced, just lived. And that's what I intend to keep doing. Living, telling the truth. Rocking in the swing until the breeze gets cool and the coffee goes cold. And when people ask what happened here, I'll tell them they tried to evict me at gunpoint. But they didn't know my son was a U.S. Marshal. And they didn't know I'd rather burn it all down than let fear win.